Welcome to this new episode of season 6 of Beyond the Thesis with Papa PhD. Today, I have the great pleasure of having with me, straight from Maine, Paulina Cossette. After spending 12 years in academia as a graduate student and political science professor, and struggling to find joy and work life balance while working 7 days a week, Paulina finally found the courage to leave the academy in 2019. Since becoming a copy editor, she has built a six-figure business that allows her to live and work wherever and whenever she wants, take real vacations without any guilt, and collaborate with kind, brilliant clients all over the world. Paulina is now sharing what she's learned with scholars who needed change so they can find joy and true time freedom. Okay, I'll just repeat this last one because the line broke. So they can find joy and true time freedom too. Welcome to Beyond the Thesis with Papa PhD, Paulina.
Thank you for
Uh,
having me, David.
I'm super happy to have you here. Yours is a very particular career journey, especially having gone all the way to being faculty. So I'm really curious for us to explore all of that. But you told me before we started the interview that you grew up in Florida. Now you're in Maine. Can you share a little bit more about who Paulina Cossette is? How your interest in political science drew you towards graduate school, and then maybe we'll go from there to step by step go through your journey and learn what it is that you do exactly as an editor today, and how what you do and what you've learned is allowing you to help other people enter in that space.
Yeah, so I grew up in Florida. I'm a first generation college student. I was raised by a single mom. And so the idea of owning a business never entered my mind. I never thought it was something I would do or something I could do. And so I was a good student. Got straight A's, and so I understood I needed to go to college, and I did. And when I graduated with my bachelor's degree in political science, I had no idea wanted what I had no idea what I wanted to do. Um, but I thought I like school, so I'll just keep going and figure it out. And so I went on to get my PhD in political science, and when you start a graduate program, you're sort of it's assumed that you go on and be a professor and that you're going to follow the track and keep going. And, no one really talks about other options. And
Hmm.
so I followed along. I did
Hmm.
what my advisor suggested, and I went out on the market and got a tenure track job. And it was in a city I didn't want to live in, and at a school I didn't want to be at, but I was being told that this is what you're supposed to do and you don't have to stay there forever. And so I did it. And I think my story, academia, is like a lot of people's, where we do the best we can, we do everything we're told, and yet we're still miserable because we're always being taken advantage of. And so after uh, probably 7 years on the tenure track at two different schools, I had a child and I was working 7 days a week, and I couldn't do it anymore. And I realized I had to leave. And so July of one summer, 2019, I quit and we moved to Maine, which is where my husband grew up. And I've never been happier. So, it was quite the journey, and it was a lot of really terrible experiences that I'm now able to use to try to help other people find their way out too.
Hmm. Yeah, that kind of storyline, I think, is one that will resonate with a lot of people out there. A lot of the listeners of the show, of course, but a lot of people just in the PhD, the graduate studies community, and especially considering you being a first generation graduate student. It's the same case for me, and I think part of it, part of this question of uh, seeing just one path to follow has to do, a little bit of it has to do with being first generation. You have, unless you have a mentor right from the beginning, or mentors that kind of steer you and show you the behind the scenes, it's tough to navigate, and to actually be very intentional about each choice and each turn you take in your journey. And then, like you said, you end up being taken by the current, and then you kind of wake up at a certain moment, either after one or two postdocs, or like yourself, one or two positions in tenure track, and seeing, okay, this is actually where I heard I was supposed to come, but it's not working for me. uh, and from what you're saying, you work with people who maybe have similar experiences, and challenges in their journey, in their academic journey. From your experience of working with academics who are considering a change and a pivot, you know apart from this question of being first generation and maybe doing the best we can with the resources and the knowledge we have, what other obstacles are people facing that bring them to this realization of, oh, you know what, okay, I've come this far, but I need to pivot. What sort of obstacles do they bring when talking with you, in that context of reorienting?
Yeah, I think, as a first gen college student and coming from like a blue collar background, you go to academia thinking this is stability, right? This is a
Hmm.
salaried job. I remember being an undergrad and being told that an assistant professor made $50,000 a year, and I thought, oh my god, that's a lot of money. And then when you get here, and you're working 80 hours a week, you realize it's really not that much money for what you're
Yeah.
doing, you have. But yet, uh, no matter what background you come from, you are channeled in academia to that one path, right? The go get the tenure track job, do the research, do the teaching, get tenure, right? Write a book. Like it's like that set path that we're supposed to follow. And I think that so many people, particularly women and particularly people with families, um, are on this path, and we're trying to do the right thing. We're trying to do what we're supposed to do to be happy and productive. And yet we're miserable and we just have no idea what else to do because no one has ever talked to us about what else you can do with a PhD. And that was my challenge when I left. I cut I quit and we moved across the country, and so it was a clean break. But I didn't have a job. I needed to apply
Hmm.
to jobs, and so I was sending out resumes, and I was constantly told that I was overqualified, and nobody wanted to hire me. Part of it is we live in rural Maine and there aren't many options here, but even for remote jobs, I just could not crack the code on how to get a non-academic job. And so I had just written a book and worked with a copy editor with the press, and I thought,
Okay.
well, I could try this for a little while. And I did, and I'm so glad I did because I absolutely love it. But, I think so many people that I talk to who they just feel trapped in academia because they don't know what else their options are.
Hmm. That is, yeah, that is a fact still today. I think some PhD programs or institutes are starting to wake up to the fact that they need to offer something to graduate students, because the reality is 80% of graduate students at least will not find a job, a tenure track position, because they just don't exist for for that many people that come out every year with the degree. And yeah, it's one of the big gaps in training or in preparation that you come out of graduate school with, is being ready to approach the job market with this specific degree, but outside academia. Yeah. So how did you then navigate that? You said that you were working with this editor, of course, so there's some serendipity there. an opportunity that arose. But those first, tailored resumes, those first conversations, or maybe interviews that you had, how did they go? Did you end up, did you end up learning out of them something that helped you understand what the this kind of loss in translation from you, a PhD holder, and an employer who doesn't understand why you're in front of them with this degree? Are there lessons learned that you can share based on that experience, or did you then just straight away go to become an entrepreneur?
Yeah, so well, when I was a professor, I had no idea that copy editors existed because I had always been a strong writer and I never needed to hire an editor to help me.
Hmm.
And so it wasn't until I was publishing my book and this woman who was a freelancer for Routledge, uh, it's just part of the process of publishing a book. The copy editor works with you and cleans up your book, your manuscript, and all that. And so that's when the light bulb went off. That if she can get a job doing this, then so can I. And so, I really did go into it thinking it was going to be temporary. But and early on, I saw myself not as an entrepreneur, but as a freelancer. I could be a contractor or a freelancer for these bookstores, or I looked into editing agencies, these companies that hire basically exclusively freelancers to edit academic research.
Hmm.
And I needed a job. I made a resume and I sent it out to as many companies as I could, and I started getting hired. And you know, one advantage that faculty or other people with academic experience have going into editing is that we already know how to edit research. We do it
Hmm.
all the time, whether we're grading papers, supervising student research or co-authoring. We do editing all the time, and so you don't. There's not a lot that you need to learn per se, to go in and to start a career like this. At least in terms of the editing aspect. So I don't have any insight on the industry side of things because I never succeeded at that.
Hmm.
But at least, starting as a freelancer and learning the ropes, it was not that difficult because so much on my academic public experience.
Hmm. So so this means that it was fairly easy for you to then do that work of translating, or at least communicating your transferable skills from what you did in academia to this specific space, which is editing. Um, so in those first, I don't know, as a freelancer, those first conversations with clients, um how did you present yourself? Or maybe putting the question another way, what were the questions that they were asking for you to assess whether you would be the person they needed for the job?
Yeah, so it I think it was, you bring up the good point about translating your skills as a PhD or a professor, and I think it can be really incredibly difficult to do that if you're trying to break into an industry job. But because I was aiming for these freelance positions for, university presses or editing agencies, all I needed to do in my resume was first to cut down my CV to a one-page resume, which was
Yes.
hard. And but to just emphasize or kind of, you have all these edit mentioning, you just need to reframe them as specifically editing skills. So instead of putting on your resume that you supervise student research, say that you have 10 years of editing experience, which it's true. It's just in academia, we call it supervising student research or authoring.
Hmm.
And when you're going to an editing agency, you want to emphasize that you do actually, have that editing and publishing experience. Um, you might also put your publications on the resume just or summarize. I have 5 peer-reviewed journal articles or something like that. Show that you have that publishing experience, but I think it's a matter of just ref always done as academic editing work.
Hmm.
Um, and so there is a bit of an adjustment, but when you are applying as a freelancer, that's all you need is to show that you have that PhD terminal degree, the one-page resume, and then an email cover letter that you send to these companies. Not even like
Hmm.
a full one-page cover letter or anything, just an email. Um, and they're pretty open, I think, as long as you're very precise, right? And you've got a clean resume without any typos, then
Yeah,
that's how I broke in.
of course.
And I spent 3 or 4 years working as a freelancer because I had a young child and then I had a second child. And so my time was taken up. But after a while, I did start to learn uh, to attract private clients. And I think that's when
Okay.
things really got exciting because I enjoy that work a lot better and it pays a lot better too.
Of course, of course. And now, you in those first conversations and agencies that you contacted, it was your domain of expertise of academic research important to them? Was it kind of secondary? How important? Because, like you were saying, you had to cut your CV into a resume, into a one-page thing. One thing you cut is a lot of the details, the granular details of what you achieved during your academic journey, which is you're in academia, that's what's important, all the publications, etc., etc. And I wonder how much of the specifics of that is valued or is important when you are launching yourself into a career as an editor, or is it more, or do they ask of you to be more of a generalist? So for you, did you work directly in projects
Yeah, I
related to
think
political science?
no. I think they do want more of a generalist.
Okay.
And I think that's true of editing in general. So especially true when you're freelancing with these companies. And it's because you are not serving the role of a peer reviewer, right? You're not assessing whether or not the work is publishable, whether or not the methods are correct. You are simply assessing the language and the writing, and your job is to try to improve the writing to make it as clear and concise as possible. If you also want to add some comments and tips that are more of a substantive nature, then that's fine. But really, what they're looking for is, are you precise? Can you return the edited file complete and on time? So it's they're not looking for an expertise in political science.
Hmm.
And in
Hmm.
fact, when I started out working for some of these agencies, they would send me articles that were in totally different fields in chemistry and engineering and computer
Oh, wow.
science. And it was a bit of a struggle because that's a totally different language than what I speak. And I did the best I could. But nowadays, with private clients, I mainly work with people that are, the social sciences, humanities, um, subjects like that. I would not take on something, like in chemistry, because it's a disservice
Mhm.
to the client to try to have me sort through that.
Of course, and it makes total sense. And my journey, and I do medical writing, has been the same. Like, once I was able to start having my own clients, of course, then I had a choice of what type of projects to take on, and versus working in an agency where then you take what is put in front of you. That being said, my experience working at an agent at a medical writing agency was that I learned a lot, and that allowed me then, a little bit like you, to then transition to being able to work for my own clients. So I think there's also a learning journey there, where the more freelance work for an agency is less, maybe, palatable. You can be surprised by the subjects, or challenged by what you need to work on, but you learn the tricks of the trade. and then, just like you said, you eventually are able to become more of an entrepreneur and having your own portfolio of clients. Can you talk a little bit about how that transition happened? Whether it was something slow, or was it a clean break from one to the other for you?
Yeah, well, for me, it was particularly slow, mainly because I had 2 little kids, and I just,
Yeah,
you know,
of
I
course.
I'm very focused on getting as much work that done as I could in a small amount of
Mhm.
time. And part of the problem is there's really no guidance out there that's specific to academic editors in terms of how to create a business or how to do
Mm,
marketing. You know, there's all kinds of marketing advice out there, but it's hard to sift through if you, especially if you have no experience in entrepreneurship.
yeah.
And so that's why I recommend in to the students who are in my course that who all have backgrounds as faculty is the editing agencies, like you said, are not ideal. They don't pay very well. You're not really getting to choose your projects. But it lets you practice those editing skills in the context of being an editor rather than a professor. And you don't have to think about finding clients or marketing, writing up a contract for your clients to sign or any of all that other stuff that comes in later
Yeah.
on. If you start with the agency, they send you as much or as little work as and you practice the editing skill, get really good at it. And for the 4 to 6 months or so that you're doing that, you can also be trying to build up a network of clients that may want to hire you later down the line. Um, and so yeah, it took me probably 3 or 4 years to really start branching out and trying to attract private clients.
Mhm.
A lot of that, like I said, is because there's just not help out there to teach you how to do it. But a lot of it too, I think, was a self confidence issue. I thought,
Mhm.
maybe a little bit of imposter syndrome left over from academia that, told
Classic.
me
Yeah.
I wasn't good enough yet or I wasn't experienced enough yet and I needed to take more time. And when I did finally start attracting clients, I realized that I really do work and they're always really happy with me.
Mhm.
I
Mhm.
am good at this, and I think a lot like, we all go through so much trauma in academia that tells us that we're not good enough, and it's everything in academia is about criticism, and when you get out in the real world, you realize that you are good enough, you are great at what you do, and if you can find that thing that you're really passionate about, then you can excel at it, and so, um, yeah, so I think it took me longer than it should have, which is a big reason why I developed this course to try to help other
Mhm.
people, do it in a year instead of 4
Yeah.
years.
N- No, and it's great. It's great that you're doing that, because we face these obstacles. We kind of, how do you say, we're in the jungle and you're like cutting these like paths because you can't see anything in front of you. Then if you have the chance to turn around and help people, give them a compass and a and a blueprint to follow, it's very gratifying, and it's a great service to the community for sure. Now, you've mentioned something kind of in passing, and it relates to something that is always a black box, or often a black kind of a black box for people coming out of academia into the non-academic space, which is how to present yourself in the job market, and to but where I'm going is how to value yourself in the job market. Coming out of academia, like you said, you learn this behavior of giving a lot of hours for a salary or a compensation that is not proportional to the time that you give. So my what I usually say is that you actually learn to undervalue yourself, and that often ends up being um, having a slowing effect of your career and also your remuneration evolution once you're out of the academic space. is this something you cover with the people you work with? How to understand how much your time is worth, how much your work and your and these skills that, like you just said, you learn to undervalue them and to have them criticized, and then you come out and actually people appreciate them and value them, but often we don't know what that how that translates into dollars. Is this something you talk about with your the people you coach?
Yeah, we actually, in our group coaching, we meet once a week on Zoom. And a few weeks
Okay.
ago, some of the students, they had this light bulb moment where, we talked about how in academia you're voluntold to do all these things. Like you're supposed to teach and then do
Oh,
research, and like the bar keeps changing, right?
yeah.
Of expectations. You're supposed to go to more student events, and you're supposed to uh, come up with conference ideas, and it just keeps going and going, and your salary doesn't grow with it. Your responsibilities increase, but you're not being compensated for that extra time you have to spend. And in the freelancing world or entrepreneurship world, you are paid usually by the word, right? When you work for these editing agents, they're paying you X amount of dollars for a 10,000 word article. And one of my students asked me, "Well, what if I get the article and it has 11,000 words instead? What do I do?" And I said, "Well, you write them and tell them you shouldn't be doing work that you're not getting paid for." And she
Exactly.
said she had to think that for a while because she's not used to that concept, of like actually speaking up and saying, you're having me do this extra work, so I want to be paid for it. And so that's
Mhm.
definitely something that they work through in the course. And aspect of value that I think is really important is sometimes we feel guilty as editors for charging however much our rate is, project, because especially if you're editing a book, it can be eight or $10,000 to edit a book said and done. And uh we feel bad, we feel like we should charge less because this person is having to pay us for our work. But
Mhm.
what I try to emphasize to people is think about the value that you're giving to the client, right? If you are, let's say you're editing a job market materials, a research statement or teaching statement or cover letter, what is the value to that person of getting an interview at the school they're applying to because you've improved their materials? Is it $100, $500, a thousand
Mhm.
dollars? It's probably a lot, right? And so think of it, instead of thinking about, oh, my hourly rate comes out to X amount of dollars per hour. Think about it in terms of the value that you're providing to the client for that interview or that publication or whatever it is that you're helping them with.
Yeah. No, it's definitely a change in mindset because it's a big change in culture. Now, maybe a question that's kind of a follow up to this is, uh, well, first, okay, a question first is, are all the people you work with leaving completely academia to work in editing, or are some of them kind of mixing both activities, and just learning it with you to add it to their quiver, to so to say?
Yeah, so it's, when I first started advertising the course, I thought it would primarily be junior faculty or people who were just starting out in their careers. Maybe they visiting position or they're postdocs or something having trouble finding a job. And so they would look to editing as an alternative career. And people who fit that description. But what I was surprised in is it's actually quite a lot of my students are tenured or full professors who have been at this so long, they've achieved the holy grail of tenure, and they're
Hmm.
still miserable, and they're exhausted and burnout. And so some of them are, I would say it's probably half and half. Some of them are, either they've already quit or this is their last semester and they've turned in their resignation. and they're moving to do editing full time, or maybe as like an early retirement option. Whereas others are still sticking with the faculty job. They're not really happy about it, but they need the income. And so I
Hmm.
think the idea is that they can try editing to start, see how it goes, and then once they've been able to build up their client base and their business, they can quit the academic job and do the editing full time.
Okay. Now, so now the follow up question: um, if let's say you're doing this full time, what are in the industry and coming with that profile, right? You've been a professor, you've had this academic career, so you bring those skills with you, that profile. uh, what can it look like in terms of substituting a salary of academia with one in the space? uh, you know yeah, in what ballpark is it? Does is it the sorry, in what ballpark is a salary that an editor can make coming from this profile? I don't know if it's an easy question to answer.
So there are a lot of factors, obvious. Oh yeah. Well, I mean, the answer is there's a huge range, right?
Okay.
And I'd say a lot of the factors that play into it are, how many hours can you work, because it's you're not on a salary anymore, and so it's how much you get paid depends on how much work you can do. Mm, and something to think about there is, remember that editing is a solitary, or is a sedentary. It's also solitary, but it's a
Mhm.
sedentary job, and so you have to think about how long can you sit staring at a computer screen. Um, the other major factor, is how quickly can you edit. And so
Mhm.
I would say, a beginner editor can probably edit around 1,000 words an hour. I edit any 2,500 and 3,500 words an hour. And so if obviously if you can be fast and accurate, and you're charging by the word, then that increases your hourly rate, that your effective rate that you're earning.
Of
Um,
course.
but to, more directly answer your question, I my first year, uh, editing, when I was just working for the editing agencies and publishers and I had a small child at home, I made
Mhm.
about $45,000. So that was
Okay.
slightly less than what I was making as a professor, but I was only working about 20 hours a week. And
Okay.
they don't give you insurance, or they don't contribute to retirement, and so I'm lucky that I have a partner, a husband who has a salary job, who offers that. But so yeah, so all these factors play a role. And when you get into working exclusively with private clients, I'm on track this year to now make over $100,000. So
Okay.
it is quite a range, and it really depends on those things that I mentioned: the speed, can you be accurate and quick, can you work 30 to 40 hours a week,
Mhm.
and are you willing to charge more, to value.
Yeah, yeah, of course. And I imagine that this is something you cover in your training. Um, right now, here for people who are watching, I have the link to the webinar that you give, which I guess is kind of an intro webinar to what you offer as coaching, which is called "What is Academic Editing and Is It Right for Me?" I will share the link in the show notes for people who are listening only on the podcast. But I imagine that people who are coming to you end up creating some sort of community, because, like you said, it's a solitary job, right? A bit like me, I do a lot of translation. Again, it's also something you do on your own, in front of a screen, and with your different resources, etc. Um, so is there, let's say, a community, you know around Acadia editing? Is there, for someone who's listening and thinking of maybe taking the leap? Can they expect to learn these things with you, but also with other peers that have gone through your program? Is there, because you said that there's a big range, which also must mean that clients, first you need to find them, but they're not there's not a single place where you go and find clients. You need to do some work and some networking to find them. How is that? Is there an organized community of editors coming from academia, or is it maybe around you and what you offer there is a small one? How is that? How alone are you when you take the leap, basically?
So there are some groups on Facebook where that are for editors. A couple that are specific to academic editors, um, but there's nothing that's specific for faculty who are becoming academic editors. And so that's another I created this course is because I wanted to get people together who have been through these pretty terrible experiences and to have that community aspect to, and so part of the course that I teach is not just the digital course with the videos and the templates and everything, but we get together once a week on Zoom and we talk for an hour about whatever challenges people are having. And so when we started in July this summer, there were a few weeks that we dedicated to just transitioning your identity from being a professor to being an
Mm,
editor, and talking about what have we been through and how do we overcome that, and questions like how do you value yourself and those kinds of things. um
mhm,
then we sort of went through this phase of how do we build the resume and apply for jobs and start a website. And now some of the group members are going back to teaching with the start of the semester, and so we're talking about how do we balance editing plus teaching. um, and so, yeah, it is, editing. If you go off on your own editing, it can be quite isolating because you're working from home, and your interactions with colleagues are really limited to these Facebook groups of editors. But I think this space that we're building is really helpful because we've all been through the same thing. We're all faculty. We've all tried publishing, and now we're moving into this editing career and we can support each other as we go along.
yeah, yeah. So if you're listening here and you're thinking of editing, first there's the webinar where you can understand whether it is for you or not, and then eventually there's a community growing around this program that will make it, you know, that'll give you kind of a little tribe that you can start with instead of going it alone. Uh, Now, one thing we didn't cover. What you mentioned, one thing that is always very very interesting to me, which is identity. Maybe we'll talk about that just later. But one thing we didn't talk about, and that often is mentioned by people who change professional spaces, is training, upskilling, etc. In your experience, have you needed, by requirements of your clients, to go get specific training, or teach yourself, because that's one of the things that we as PhDs know very well how to do. How has that been, or how do people navigate that often, that way of thinking, or that mindset that's often related to imposter syndrome, like you mentioned, which is, oh, I need to get now a specific training to become, or to consider myself a real editor?
Yeah, that's a great question. So there are editing certificate programs out there. The University of Chicago, San Diego, several schools have these programs, and you can pay anywhere from $2,000 to $6,000 to go through and basically learn to be an editor. Um, and I do think like you of academics who are thinking about going into this career feel like they need this extra training or this this education to be able to do it. But I think specifically postdocs, and anybody who has gone through a graduate training. I don't you need a certificate program. I don't have a certificate. I essentially look at the editing agencies and the publishers as on the job training, where
Hmm.
you're not making a ton of money working for them, but you're getting paid at least. You have some income coming in. You are learning the ropes through their system. There are some websites like Scribendi is a big one, where they actually provide you with paid training, and they do the norms in academic editing, and so that's how I. But it's really not all that different, like I was saying earlier. It's not that different from what we do. We're grading papers and we're supervising students. You're essentially reading somebody's journal article that they want to submit and giving them feedback on it. And the biggest difference is that you actually have the time to spend on correcting the grammar and all that stuff that I'm sure we want to do on students' papers, but we just don't have the time to do it.
Of course.
Um, and so I think the probably the most important aspect of training that you would need is some more advanced level Microsoft Word training, because you're using track changes and some of the other functions in Word that most people don't use every day.
Okay.
But that's pretty simple.
That's really interesting because it was exactly my experience with medical writing, which is something I had never heard about once as I left, as I finished my PhD, was that working in that agency, and I stayed there for almost 5 years, was what kind of taught me the the basic ways, and also specific. There's always specific preferences from each agency or each publisher. Like, I imagine it's the same for you, but it was a great school, and it reflects upon everything I've done since, and it's actually also reflected in collaborations that I've had, because people knew, oh, you come from there, okay, I want to work with you because you have this, I know that you were trained this way, and that the onboarding process at this agency is, has this sort of quality assurance in a certain way. So yeah, it totally makes sense to me. Now, maybe to get to the end, because we're reaching the end part of the conversation, this question of identity. So this is of course, if you go all the way to being faculty, I think you probably go deeper into this process of assuming this personality, this identity of, I'm a professor, I'm a scholar, I'm a scientist, I'm a researcher, and then eventually, like it happened with you, you decide to leave, and you have to kind of peel off these layers of identity that you have been building, with the blood, sweat, and tears all these years. Often, I talk with people who do that right after the PhD, let's say, and you go even further, and for them it's already hard, kind of saying, okay, all these years that I've dedicated to this and to getting this degree, I'm now dealing with these feelings of, okay, maybe failure even, or maybe because people are asking me, so you did all this and now you're moving out. What is, what is this? So is clearly this is something that you have gone through. How, how are people dealing with that, or how are you helping people deal with that very, very tough experience of having to kind of reinvent yourself after years and years of building something, like I said, with a lot of sacrifice?
Yeah, that's a really important question, I think. And it goes along with what we were saying earlier about how academia is very single track. Like you said, decades even building this identity as a professor or researcher or whatever. And it's a prestigious role, right? Be a professor at a university, to be an important scholar, that's prestige and carries a lot of weight. And I'm sure, there's a little bit of ego in there too, right? Like I'm this important person and I've spent years dedicated to this career, and now I'm supposed to give all that up, my books, my publications, all of that stuff, and just cut it from the CV. Like it's very symbolic when you're cutting down your CV
Oh
to
my,
this
yeah.
one-page resume. I think that could be hard for people. But what I would say, first, I think that's a totally normal feeling, a totally normal reaction. But what I would say is to think about what you're gaining when you make this change. Clearly, if you're unhappy in academia, your mental health is probably suffering. You're struggling. You're not making a ton of money, probably, right? There's all these factors in your situation that are not giving you the quality of life that you want or that you deserve. And if starting a new career and having to work through this process of developing a new identity is what it costs to have happiness, time with your family, to be able to take 2 weeks of vacation and not do any work and not feel guilty about it, all these things that we don't have in academia, to me,
Yeah.
it's totally been worth it. Because when I was teaching, I was so anxious. I was constantly worried about everything. I had terrible anxiety. I was depressed. It was awful. And
Mhm.
now it's running a business is challenging, right? It's not
Of course.
cookies and cake every day, It's like it's hard, but you have to hustle. But I'm so happy, like I work for me. If I want to take time off to spend with my kids before they go back to, I do it, and I don't
Yeah.
have to answer to anybody. And I do make sure they're happy with my work. But beyond that, if I'm not going to work in for 2 weeks to go on a cruise or whatever, then I don't have to ask permission. And it's just, I think, especially working with these other faculty as well and helping them along that path to finding joy is also really, really rewarding. So,
Mhm.
yeah, I mean, if you're unhappy in academia, who cares about the identity, the professor title? Just leave it behind, and you will find happiness in whatever it is that you end up doing.
Yeah. Plus, one of the things that you mentioned is, and that helps with being with feeling fulfilled with this new identity, is that people now that you're working with or working for give you their positive feedback and appreciate working with you. Of course, I'm sure you'll confirm that when you're a freelancer or when you're working on your own, there's clients that are going to come and go. There's matches that are not good, but those clients that you end up repeat working with, and that all that that are that voice how pleased they are with your work, that makes it all worth it. At least that's my experience. Yeah.
Absolutely. And yeah, I mean, in academia, you're constantly being told what you're doing wrong and what you need to do more. You need to do more. What you're doing is not yeah, to have somebody send me an email and say, I really appreciate your kindness or your care on this, or yeah, it makes it all totally worth it. And yeah, it's just a better way of life.
Yeah. And and again, the corollary, a better way of life, if the other one is kind of being stressful and affecting your mental health. Of course, people thrive people do thrive in academia, and if it works for them, that's great. But I think well, I kind of want to give a little summary of what I'm taking home from this conversation. But before that, let's actually acknowledge. Well, first, I'm sharing here the webinar link again for people who are watching. Again, I'll share it in the show notes. Your website is acadiaediting in one word.com. um, where can people, if they are interested, apart from this, and actually I can share the link here because it's really not complicated. So acadiaediting.com/become an editor in one word. That's the link to the webinar. But if they want to reach out to you personally, ask you some questions, maybe give you feedback on the conversation, what's the best way for them to reach out to you?
So they can just go to my website, acadiaediting.com, and right at the top, I have two buttons. One says send me a message, and one says schedule a call. So I'm happy to talk with anybody who is thinking about leaving academia or wondering if editing is right for them. I really do love helping people figure this out.
Mhm.
And so, yeah, just through the website, or I'm also on, Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn. So that works too.
Perfect. And the way to find you is Acadia Editing or by your name, Paulina Cossette, on those platforms, Facebook, etc.
Uh, yeah, it's LinkedIn is my name. Facebook
Okay,
and Instagram are Acadia Editing.
perfect, excellent. Paulina, so as I was going to say, um, one of the things that I found really interesting in your story, it's really a microcosm of what all these people who are leaving academia for different reasons, but are going through. Be it right after the PhD, be it in the postdoc, or be it when they are faculty. And actually, let's start with this latest point or subject that we talked about, which is the question of identity. It is a process of mourning in a certain way for something that you embarked on at a young age, with some vision and some ideal of where it would take, and then that along the way, as you treaded the terrain, you understood, okay, I I got here, I actually accomplished this, but this is not where I want to stay. And what I'm getting from the last words that you shared is nothing is worth paying with your mental health and even maybe your physical health. And there is space out there. There's audience out there for you with your background, but in other spaces where you'll be valued, where your time and your know-how will be valued in another way, and where even the way you are mm, thanked and the way you are appreciated is very is very different from what happens in academia, which, like you said, is more a place where gaps are pointed than accomplishments are applauded, let's say. Unless you're really old and then it's at the end of a career and then you get the applause. It's a big exercise in delayed gratification, let's say. um and then in the practical aspect of becoming an editor, what I really think is important is, from what you shared, and of course, uh, nothing will be better for someone who's interested than going to talk with you and to take part in your webinar. But is don't let imposter syndrome weigh too much on you. Trust all the experience and the years that you've had doing doing tasks, being grading, like you said, or correcting, and even grant writing, etc., etc. All things where you've given extreme attention to detail to be able to reach your academic goals. Well, those are all transferable to this space of editing. And so and this is based on the question that I asked you, don't follow the reflex of right away thinking, okay, I want to get into this space, I need to go get a certification. Maybe you will later on, but I think what you said, Paulina, and that is really smart and it's the way to go, is start working with an agency where you learn the ropes as you're paid and as you're working on projects. And then after that stint doing that and having learned how to do the job, then reevaluate if you do feel you need something. But probably what will happen is, okay, now I've learned this language, I've learned this culture, I'm able to take it to someone else. And so what I'm really taking home from our conversation is trust the journey that is behind you, and don't devalue it just because you're changing spaces. It will be there forever, and it'll serve you forever in different ways, in another, in other settings, with other uh, kind of in another culture, but it'll serve you, and it can allow you to create your own career and support yourself in life, just like you, Pauline. I don't know if this for you, this works for you, or if I missed something, but I think it's really a very positive message, and I think we need more people like you out there, telling people, leaving is not failing, and but maybe that's the one sentence that kind of encapsulates the one of the main messages that I think you brought today.
Yeah, I mean, outside academia, people reinvent themselves all the time. They jobs, they change careers, they go back to school. And so I think doing that is totally normal. We just have to reframe, how we think about it in terms of academics. So editing is like you said, continue the skills that you've already had, continue using them in a new context.
Mhm. Paulina, this has been great. It's been super nice talking to you. Maybe, yeah, actually, when I end the stream, don't go away. I need to be sure that the recording is uploaded. But I wanted to thank you for having been on Papa PhD. I think this will help a lot of people, even if they're not specifically interested in editing. A lot of what you said is applicable to any other interests that people have after academia. So, yeah, thank you so much for having been on the show. It's been a real pleasure.
Thank you, David. It was a lot of fun.